I don't think it's a surprise when I tell you that the MCU is going through a rough patch.
Just kiss me, man.
Kind of like that stage in your relationship where you're constantly arguing with your partner and anything they do makes you unhappy, but you're too scared to break it off. I mean, sure, there's been a few good projects in the last couple years, but between Ant-Man, the new Captain America, and the Marvels, it just doesn't hit the same. I mean, seriously, who watched this? Sure, you get that 2-week stretch of enjoying your relationship again, thinking you have it all figured out with a movie like Guardians 3, but then those 2 weeks run out and you're left waiting for good times again, but all you have to look forward to is Thunderbolts. And I know it's popular to shit on the MCU now and make fun of everything it's become, but do you guys remember when new trailers used to drop and that'd be all you talked about for a week? Remember when the Endgame trailer came out and there were like 100 different fan theories and analysis people used to make? Now an MCU trailer comes out and the only ones excited are brain-rotted kids or adults who blow 10 grand a year at Disney. And sure, maybe I'm just blinded by nostalgia and romanticizing the past. An ex told me I did that once, don't ask. But just like a toxic relationship, I still have hope that Marvel can change, because do you guys remember how good it used to be? Now look, I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with you if you still enjoy these movies. If you still get excited for an average Marvel release, then good for you. You can sit with the rest of the family at the kids' table. But for the average person, Marvel just isn't what it used to be. And it's a shame, because they used to produce some of the most entertaining and compelling stories, not just in superhero movies, but in all of cinema. And if we're in that about to break up stage right now, where you're always arguing and constantly drained, then I'd like to take you back to the honeymoon phase, where everything was just perfect. Daredevil. Easily the best show and maybe even the best character that Marvel's ever produced. It's rare to get an MCU project that pushes the medium out of its formulaic comfort zone. Despite being basically 10 years old at this point, Daredevil has remained a fan favorite. And that's for a reason. It wasn't just good, it was dark, it was gritty. Imagine if Marvel made a show like The Penguin, only they did it 10 years ago when movies like Ant-Man and Age of Ultron were the status quo. There's a reason that Daredevil's still talked about today, and there's a reason his character is being revived almost 10 years later, because when you take the absolute best parts of the MCU, the best written superhero show of the 21st century, and combine it with a tone so dark that the MCU still hasn't come close to matching it, you get Daredevil. I'd like to preface this video by saying I'm going into Daredevil Born Again completely blind. I know nothing about the original comic run or the story, and I'm basing everything I'm going to talk about off the previous run of the show, as well as the current and past states of the MCU. With that being said, can we just all get a round of applause for Charlie Cox? This dude is amazing and probably plays Daredevil better than a blind person could. Because, you know, they can't see. Same with Jon Bernthal as the Punisher. For everything that show did wrong, Jon Bernthal was pretty much perfect, and Born Again looks to keep that same dark, violent tone that made the original show so special. So finally, let's talk about Daredevil. The new one, that is. I'm not talking about the old one. Immediately, we're thrown back into the cruel world of Daredevil. Like, literally immediately. And this is probably my biggest issue with the show right now. It's too fucking fast. Within like 2 minutes, Foggy dies, and Bullseye gets thrown off a roof, with Matt breaking, or at least almost breaking, his one rule. It's hard to judge the show's pacing as a whole since there's only 2 episodes out, but the pacing, especially in episode 1, was way too fast. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Daredevil Born Again makes it very clear that this is a separate show from Netflix's Daredevil. And for better or worse, this is done mainly through the cinematography. Now, I've seen a lot of people complaining about how different the cinematography is, and personally, I think it's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, all the handheld shots were just a little disorienting. I'm personally not a fan of my screen constantly shaking, but I think the show taking a brighter tone compared to how dark Netflix's was is fine, if done well, which it was. These shots towards the end of the episode with Matt surrounded by the ugly streets of New York, backed in red and blue hues, looks amazing. And then immediately contrasting that with Fisk above New York and its people, alone on some rooftop isolated from all the city's issues, shows the disconnect between Fisk and New York. It might be a little on the nose, but Matt being surrounded by people shows whether as a lawyer or as Daredevil, he has the average person's best interest in mind. Fisk being isolated shows he doesn't truly understand or even want what's best for New York, just what's best for himself. And sure, the original show had some of the best lighting, camera work, and cinematography that I've ever seen. Not just from a superhero show, but from anything. But it makes sense that Born Again wants to take the show in another direction. This isn't Daredevil Season 4, it's a completely new story. And even still, Born Again keeps a lot of the best parts of the original run. Take the opening fight between Daredevil and Bullseye. The entire fight is made to look like a one-take, an homage to the original. Now, obviously, it's not, but with clever camera work, the fight looks clean and like there isn't a single cut. It's not as easy to follow slow or as striking as fights were in the Netflix show, especially this one, but it's still good. And that brings me to this point: why is there so much CGI? Part of what made the original so incredible is how grounded it felt. I get Matt basically turning into Spider-Man would be pretty hard to make with practical effects, but how come once he's up on the rooftop, it's still all cheaply made CGI? This is literally a basic punch and Matt's gliding 10 feet across the rooftop to hit him. You're telling me they couldn't shell out a bit of money to rent out a rooftop and film this scene? And I understand that most of episode 1 was a complete reshoot and that they were probably pretty rushed, but this fight is kicking off the entire season. I feel like they should have put a little more care into it instead of green screen backgrounds and shitty CGI. Also, on a side note, what is wrong with the show's aspect ratio? If you guys don't know much about aspect ratios, that's fine, but usually shows are shot in a 16:9 aspect ratio. That way you don't have black bars on your screen. But Daredevil Born Again is shot in a 21:9 ratio, basically what a movie's supposed to be shot in. It's not that big of an issue, you kind of get used to it after a while, but it just feels unnecessary. With all that being said, that's not to say that Daredevil Born Again is a bad looking show. I think for the most part, it looks incredible. Like this scene with Matt cooking in his apartment. Obviously he's blind, so he doesn't keep any lights on in his house, so the show cleverly uses the moon to light up parts of his apartment. It's a nice little detail that shows there is a lot of care put into the show, but when you're up against one of the best shot shows of our generation, it's hard to compare. The main issue with the cinematography isn't that it's bad or that it's not as good as the original. The biggest problem with Born Again cinematography is that it's noticeable, and not in a good way. Like I said earlier, you get used to it, but the whole point of cinematography is that you shouldn't notice it unless you get an incredible shot. I feel like I'm complaining a lot, but I do want to make it clear that I do really like Born Again. I think it's easily the best MCU made show already, which isn't really a flex, but of course this is because of the writing. This might be a controversial take, but I feel like the strongest part of the original Daredevil was its cinematography. Don't get me wrong, the writing was great, but at times it felt like the show got just a little distracted, especially in season 2. But so far, Born Again's best aspect is definitely the writing. Again, we're only 2 episodes in, but I think it's safe to assume that this season of Born Again is gonna question Matt's morality heavily. It reminds me of that conversation between Matt and Frank, where Frank told Matt that he's one bad day away from being the Punisher, being someone who kills, who takes a life, someone who puts someone down and doesn't give them the chance to get back up. This conversation between Matt and Fisk perfectly shows that struggle with morality. Matt and Fisk talk about how both of them have come up in the world, and Matt points out that Fisk has tried to kill him just a few times. Fisk then basically points out that so is Matt, and Matt gets defensive. And while he never explicitly tried to kill Fisk, he came close, and Fisk criticizes this moral ambiguity from Matt. Matt says he'd never even try to kill Fisk, and Fisk simply states, "I wonder if your darker half would agree." The actual conversation is a lot longer and covers a lot of ground, but this specific sequence I think represents the entire show's theme so well. Just 30 minutes before this, in Showtime that is, this conversation takes place like a year after the fact that Matt tried to kill Bullseye. He threw him off that roof fully believing that he'd die, believing that the fall would kill him. Matt 100% tried to kill Bullseye for killing Foggy because just like Frank said, Matt was one bad day away from being the Punisher. The best part of Daredevil as a character has always been his conflicting morality, his internal battle between taking life or giving someone a second chance. Born Again looks to explore this theme heavily, and if the show's going in that direction, it should turn out to be pretty incredible, especially with my boy Frank coming back. Also, again, I just want to point out how great the acting is. Everyone hopped back into their roles seamlessly, and each actor is giving the same love and care that they did a decade ago. Charlie Cox and Vincent are fantastic as usual. Deborah Ann Wool only gets a few minutes of screen time, but she's great. Bullseye is as menacing as ever, and man, nobody could have bled out better than Eldon Henson did. So, can Daredevil Born Again save the MCU? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I do know that Born Again is the only show in the last 4 years that got me to pay for a Disney Plus subscription. It's the only MCU project I've been even remotely excited about in the last few years, and it's the only show I'll watch right as it premieres. It's kind of hard to judge an entire franchise based off of 2 episodes of a show, but if Marvel keeps trying to produce quality instead of fan service, they could really do something. Then again, the entire reason I'm so loyal to Daredevil is because of the show's original run, and Marvel knows a thing or two about bringing the character back, so maybe I'm a hypocrite for criticizing Marvel's focus on familiar characters instead of taking a risk, then praising those same decisions when it's a character I like. Then again, those projects usually turn out to be pretty bad. Born Again isn't perfect, and it certainly has its flaws, but it's one of the only MCU projects to make me feel something in a long time. The cinematography can be a little here and there, but the writing, acting, action, set designs, and especially the characters more than make up for it. Even if it doesn't live up to the original, I think Born Again will be one of the better shows of our lifetime, and that that in of itself is an accomplishment, especially when you're produced by Suits at Disney. So at least for the next couple months, Marvel has my subscription. Let's see how long they can hold it.